today's sessions will be another wonderful learning opportunity. And now we will wait a couple of minutes before we start it. And we want you to know that we'll be recording today's Fireside chat. Feel free to turn on your video if you would like to do so. One more time, we want you to know that we'll be recording today's Fireside chat. Feel free to turn on your video if you would like to do so. We are going to start our recording now. Amy, thank you.
Yep, we are rolling.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose Kerkeve, and I am an ESL student at CCSF. And on behalf of the Office of Student Activities and the Downtown Center's Associated Students Council, I am very excited to welcome you to our 10th and final Leadership Fireside Chat this semester. For those who are not familiar with this new leadership development program, the purpose of this leadership chat is to equip CCSF students and student leaders with a wealth of leadership insights, tips, and strategies. We hope you will have a better understanding of leadership in action from a diverse group of effective and seasoned leaders across various industries. Before we introduce today's speakers, Director Sheryl Davis, I would like to share a few details about the program. First, those who attend 7 out of the 10 Fireside Chat are eligible to receive a certificate of participation at a recognition event on May 13th. Every session is open to all students, even if you decide not to participate in the certificate part of the program. Since you have registered for today's session, thanks to Zoom, we have a record of your attendance. Nothing further is needed on your end to mark your participation. Next, please note that this session will be recorded. The links will be posted on CCSF Students Activity Office website for you to view later or to share with others so that they may benefit from this learning opportunity as well. If you have questions about this Leadership Fireside Chat program and the certificate of participation, please email Students Activity at ccsflive@mail.ccsf.edu. I would also like to share a little bit regarding today's format. After this opening remark, Amy Coffey, the Assistant Director of Students Activities, will interview today's speaker for about 50 minutes. If you have questions for Director Sheryl Davis, please enter them in the chat. And at around 5 p.m., there will be a questions and answer opportunity for Director Davis to respond to your questions. And finally, during the last 10 minutes of our time together, we will invite you to share that you've learned today that will help you in your leadership development journey. And now I turn over the floor to Candice. Candice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jose. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Candice Chen, and I'm an ESL student at CCSF. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Director Sheryl Davis. Sheryl Evans Davis, EDD, is a change maker who leads relationship-driven, community-centered initiatives. Named the Executive Director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission in 2016. Director Davis is a passionate advocate for equity, access, and educational opportunity for all. For nearly 3 decades, she has made contributions as an educator and leader with expertise in community outreach and engagement, workforce development, youth development, and violence prevention. Director Davis worked to build out an equity framework with San Francisco community stakeholders and city departments, resulting in the Office of Racial Equity. She also oversees the Equity Studies Task Force, the Blue Ribbon Panel for Juvenile Justice Reform, and the Dream Keeper Initiative, among other programs of the SFHRC. Director Davis is frequently requested to speak on issues of community wellness, equity, and strategic change work. She holds a BA from San Francisco State University, an MPA from the University of San Francisco, and an EDD from USC last year. In 2019, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from USF. Now, I would like to turn this over to Director Amy Coffey, who will be chatting with Director Davis about her leadership journey and experiences. Amy, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Candace, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We are going to jump right in, and I would like to ask Director Davis if you could give us a little bit of a background, tell us about yourself, how you got where you are today, and just let us know what your journey has looked like up until this point, and a little bit about what you do, please.
Great. Well, thank you. I want to thank Jose and Candace for getting the meeting going and the lovely introduction, and then to City College for the opportunity to share and a little bit about my my career journey. So I actually I started my career as a teacher. I graduated from San Francisco State, did not know what I wanted to do, had taken a lot of miscellaneous courses, had gone to UC Davis before I transferred to San Francisco State. And in order to graduate in a timely manner, I ended up being a liberal studies major because that was what I could do with all the diverse classes that I had taken. And then when it came time to graduate, I was like, well, what do you do with the liberal studies degree? I had gone to a career fair at San Francisco State. And while I was still in my final year of college, participated in a Multicultural Alliance Fellowship, which was focused on bringing teachers of color into private independent schools. So I started working in a private school as a teacher's assistant. And it was the first job that I had had in my 21 years of life. It was the first job that I had that I actually enjoyed and didn't despise getting up and having to go to every day. It was the first job that at the end of the day, I couldn't believe the day was over. And I knew that that's when I knew that that was what I could do. I had had quite a few jobs before and had quit almost all of them. And this one was one that I didn't want to let go. And so once I graduated, I was able to get a teaching position, and I taught for a number of years at French American International School. I taught as the kindergarten teacher. And so the way that is a bilingual immersion school. So the way that it works is that the students, kindergarten, first grade, spend a third of their day in English and 2/3 in French. And then when they get into older grades, it's 50-50. And so I had 4 sections of kindergarten, and that helped me learn names and how to engage with people. Really good skills that I still have today. I still had to do, so I had 72 students. I had to do 72 report cards. I had to do 72 parent-teacher conferences. And one thing as I learned is that you need to make sure when you are working with kindergarten students and you go to meet with their parents, that you know that student's name and you know something about them, because nothing hurts more than for a person to release their 4- and 5-year-olds to someone who doesn't see them. And so I learned pretty early on the importance of seeing people. I learned names, the importance of remembering names and being able to put a name with something that helped me remember what made them special and unique. I left French American and went to Stewart Hall, and where I taught I stayed at Stewart Hall for over a decade. But during that time, I was living in the Western Addition of San Francisco and working in Pacific Heights. And the two communities, for those who are familiar with San Francisco, are so different, and felt really conflicted about my work. And so I started doing a lot of volunteer work in the Western Addition of San Francisco at different community centers. And from there, I was invited to do some work in, excuse me, in the local district supervisor's office. And then I was able to start a program called MoMagic for the public defender's office. And then was asked to run a community center, and then ended up with my current job as the director of the Human Rights Commission. So all of it has been connected to really being true to myself and following that passion of education and a commitment to community. And it's just allowed doors to be open for me in a way that I didn't go to school saying this is what I want to do, but this is ultimately the job that was best for me.
That is amazing. I love that you just followed each step of the way, a different opportunity that felt like it was right for you, and it led to where you are. So it would be fair to say that you didn't have this all planned out and weren't aspiring to any public sector position or leadership role, but it just was something that happened naturally then.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, when I started volunteering in community the first couple times, it really was a small group of folks, very focused. And what happened is now Mayor London Breed, she was running a community center, and I had done some volunteer work at one space, and she said, hey, if you want to continue doing that, you're welcome to come over to this center and like we can partner. So I started doing work with her. I didn't know at the time that she would one day be mayor, but even during that time working in her community center, in the community center that she was running, the elected officials at that time had come in and said, hey, this is really a value. Can you, the District 5 supervisor said, hey, I've got someone who's going on leave. Can you come into my office and help with some of the community work? And so again, that was an opportunity to bring really the needs of community to City Hall. It was an opportunity to amplify community voices in a way that folks hadn't felt heard before. And so that was the motivating factor. I would say, you know, over the years, what I have realized is that there's politics in everything, and that sometimes community politics is sometimes worse than the more formal governmental structure. But that as we navigate all of these things, it really is about how do we see people? How do we support people, at least for me, like in terms of this work? And if you stay true to that, then it really does make its way for you. But yeah, I am not, at one point I thought I might run for like Board of Education or even for City College Trustee Board. But, you know, I had a conversation with someone who said to me, like, those are policy makers. And I really do love to do the implementation part. Like that piece is really important to me. And I had someone who said, I will support you 100%, but I do know that like your first meeting that you go to for a policy maker and you vote on the policy, you're going to want to go out and like actually do it. And you're not allowed to do that. And the more I thought about it, it was like, yeah, so I can work with policy makers, but I don't necessarily want to sit in that space, that seat, because it's a little too limiting for me. Like we need those folks, but I'm the person that wants to make sure that the policies that get made actually are relevant to folks in community, or that they get implemented, or that if they don't work, that there's a through line to take that back to help people pivot, as I heard mentioned earlier, and kind of do what's the best thing versus just what's the written thing.
That I think that that's so important too. And I know I am glad to have you on the ground implementing the policies and making sure that they take effect and that they're working as intended to serve our communities. For the students who may not be as familiar with the Human Rights Commission, can you talk a little bit about specifically what the work is that you do and what the commission does?
Yeah, the Human Rights Commission was founded pretty early on during the civil rights movement, really to address what was happening in other places, to avoid it happening here in San Francisco. So really was focused on issues of anti-Blackness and racism and discrimination. And so the initial focus was on creating policies that eliminated bias and discrimination. Over the years, it has grown from this focus on just the African American community to also include Indigenous people, to include LGBTQIA, to also have just the sanctuary city ordinance, so that we have support for folks who are undocumented and feel like they may be discriminated against because of their immigration status. And so we've grown even more over the last few years. So we have our Office of Racial Equity, which works citywide with other city departments to ensure that we're doing things to advance racial equity and to make sure that a person's race does not prohibit them from being able to be successful or to get the resources and support they need in the city. We also have our community engagement division, which is focused on partnerships, collaborations, information sharing, and really just helping build community. We have our Office of SHARP, which is where folks can file a complaint if they feel as if they have, if they feel the system has not supported them when they've gone to report a sexual assault or sexual harassment. And it also does some work around prevention of sexual assault and harassment. We have our work around Opportunities for All, which is paid internships for young people up to age 24. And recently we launched an initiative called the Dreamkeeper Initiative, which is focused on distributing resources and funding to support the Black community. And we're also doing a lot of support around juvenile justice reform, also doing work. Most recently, there's a committee that's just been launched, Truth and Reconciliation, with our Indigenous community, to begin to have meetings and conversations to talk about the American Indian community and how to support them. So we've got quite a few different pieces that we are that we're working on. And it's good to know that Dulce was a part of your leadership fireside chat. Yeah.
That is impressive. That is just a huge amount of work that you're undertaking. Thank you for sharing. You touched on this a little bit earlier, and I appreciate that your foundation is with the kindergartners, and that's kind of where you learn some of these techniques and philosophies you have around with working with people. What would you say are some of your core values? You mentioned, making sure that you see people. Can you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much of my career is really embedded in that kindergarten teaching experience. And so, seeing people, not just to be able to help a parent feel comfortable with leaving their child in your company, but seeing people so that you can actually support them. So when I was first starting to teach, there, like we have all these different evolutions of learning. And when I first was starting to teach, they were talking about the whole child. And so like whole language learning and like how we were supposed to do this work. And then we also started to get more into learning differences and learning styles and trying to understand that, you shouldn't just do one style fits all. And so it really became important for me during that time to better understand learning styles or learning differences. So when I first was coming out, they were also, that's when we were hearing more about autism and neurodiversity and how people process and learn differently. And having worked in a bilingual immersion program also was like just mind blowing, because you learn how much the young brain, the young mind soaks up, and how language, when folks were learning, when the young people were learning languages at that young age, that, you know, they learned it just as if they were like it was a native tongue. So when people would ask them to translate, they would say, I can't translate. And so it just became very clear the way that we engage and work with folks to just really be attentive and to allow it to flow. The other thing that I really learned working in the bilingual immersion program is the importance of art and culture, and that they weren't just a tool for busy work, but just thinking about, like, with the handwriting, right, the fine motor skills and the gross motor skills that were embedded in, like, on the surface, it just looked like they were practicing loops, right? But they were really learning how to do cursive, but that it was being embedded in their body in the same way that language was. And that there's really something to making the connection to physical touch and how we speak and how we see and how we really feel things. So for me, to this day, I still, you know, quote a lot of the poems or remember a lot of the books that I read and used when I was teaching, the importance of art, where you're just tearing up pieces of paper and gluing them, but that kinesthetic, that kind of feeling, that touch, that next level of learning, that as you are doing it, actually embeds it in your mind in a very different way, and it helps you process things differently, but it also helps you see things differently. And then just culture. I just remember being with, like, coming out of one of my classrooms, and the French teacher was coming in, and like they were getting ready to like do these Monet paintings, or they were, and like I was thinking to myself, like, they're 5, and here they are like doing their graphisme and like practicing art in a way that became second nature to them, where they wouldn't have to have it translated, but that it was just a normal everyday way of living. That it didn't have to be that you were extremely artistic, but that you just had a love of that, and you understood that it was anxiety reducing, it was a calming effect, that it brought beauty to your life every day, but it also made you valuable, right? Like being able to touch and feel like you are just as important as anyone else, to be able to like enjoy art was huge. And so those are the things that even to this day that I try to, no matter where I am, impart some level of art or song or music or culture to kind of make the learning experience go that much further. Because, you know, there are pieces for me, like I think about one of my favorite poems that was turned into a book with Basquiat illustrations by Maya Angelou, and I can still see like the images. And I was reading this book to my students and had no idea at the time, for me, who even Basquiat was, right? But that they were being exposed to that, these amazing drawings, and kind of told to go and replicate it, or using these ideas of like, life doesn't frighten me at all, you know, like Maya Angelou saying very plainly, you know, don't show me frogs and snakes and listen for my screams. If I'm afraid at all, it's only in my dreams. Using that to like launch conversation, but at the same time, like exposing 5-year-olds to Maya Angelou in a way that they're like, now they can quote Maya Angelou. Like that to me is core to like how I move and thrive, because I think the simpler we make it, whether it's through art, whether it's through spoken word, the easier it is for somebody to grasp, the better off we all are.
That's an amazing answer. Thank you. And I love the analogy of like language, you know, we if it's almost like it's innate, where it's like breathing. If you are exposed to it and immersed in it, you don't have to think about it or be intentional. It's part of who you are and how you move through life. Now I have to ask, would you consider yourself an artist, or do you have a medium that you work with?
So I I'm one of these people that goes through these, like, I think I may have OCD or something, right? Like, so it's either all or nothing. So obsessive compulsive disorder, like I feel like I function in this. So I go through these spurts where once I get on something, it's like super intense. So I was journaling for a while. So I was doing this bullet journal, like when the pandemic first started, and I was like obsessing about going in and drawing and writing and drawing every day. And like I got through, but when I got to, and it was good because I had over the years, another one of my obsessive compulsive habits was like collecting journals everywhere I went, but I never used them. So then when the pandemic hit, I had like all these journals and I was like, okay, prime time to like use them. So it was good for like the first 10 books because I went through all these books of journals. But then when I got to the last one, you would have thought I had created a new habit, but I didn't. So then I didn't have my journal book anymore. So then I had all these sketchbooks because in addition to journal books, I had bought like these sketchbooks. So I started doing YouTube, like how to draw things. So I was doing like the how to draw. So I had like all these beautiful drawings that I did for a month, and I was like forcing myself to like post it on social media so that I would like kind of force myself into it. But after 30 days, I had stopped that as well. And then I did watercolor for a little while. And then recently I was saying, oh my gosh, I've become, like there was the movie about the wedding singer. I was like, I've become the funeral singer because I've been invited recently to like sing at these funerals. So I grew up in the Baptist church. And so my stepfather was a pastor. And so I'd, done all these things. And my ex-husband was a pastor. And so a friend from years ago had said to his wife, he was sick, but I hadn't talked to him in a long time. And he had asked his wife if I would sing because he knew he was sick. He had asked if I would sing at his funeral. So I sang at the funeral, and then all of a sudden I felt like I started getting booked to do. I was like, I don't want to become the funeral singer, right? Like so now I'm like, I should sing somewhere else so that I'm not known just for singing at funerals. So, but both of my sisters are professional musicians, so I don't consider myself a real artist because they make a living off of it. But I have dabbled in a little bit of everything, and I will say I am good enough to be a kindergarten teacher at all of those things.
Thank you. That's amazing. I love it. It's almost like whatever is at your house that hasn't been touched yet, like, oh, a sketch pad. And it's like, I kind of want to stop by with like maybe some canvas and some oil paints and see what happens. But I love that you'll just pick up whatever is there and work with it and engage with it and, kind of get into that rhythm with something, even if it's for a short amount of time.
Well, I say to folks, so one of the things that I've been able to keep doing at the Human Rights Commission is that we build these curriculum guides, these literacy activities for the summer, and then for summer programs, and then go through the activity guides with the community-based organizations that run the programs. And I've always said to folks, like, you can't, even when I was teaching, I don't ask students to do something that I wouldn't do. And so really encourage people to, because you never know, you might actually be good at it. So that's also the thing, like if you never try it, I don't necessarily follow that rule when it comes to food, because I'm like one of those people that doesn't like her food to touch, but that, by and large, I will try to be a little bit adventurous with activities, but not with food.
Understood. So that is a good lead into my next question. When you said that you wouldn't ask anyone to do something that you're not willing to try or do yourself, can you talk a little bit about what your leadership philosophy is or your leadership style?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I've really had to build up the leadership skills. I think that, I'm probably more of an old school kind of hardcore leader that's like, get it done and this is your job. I told you to do it. Like, I'm going to help you. But then I was just telling somebody this the other day. I would like to think I'm like the favorite auntie, that also is like saying, okay, well, you're having a hard time, I'm gonna help you out, we'll kind of do this other way. But that by and large, I have really high expectations, right? But that I am not going to ask you to, wipe down the counters and sweep the floor if I'm not willing to go in and do it myself. I feel like that some folks are better at other things than others, but that really is my role to at least understand how everything is done if I'm going to be the leader, and be able to understand when somebody else can do it better. And also be able to understand, even if somebody else can't do it better, that I can't do everything, right? And so part of this growing for me over the last few years has been, how do I create these opportunities, or how do I build this work, and then prepare somebody else to actually lead the work. So often, the pressure to be the leader, sometimes we think means not passing things on, but a true leader is able to develop people to be able to step into that work. And that, I think, is the hardest part. Ultimately, I consider myself a servant leader. I feel like a lot of the work that I do is in service to other people, that it really is about how to improve outcomes and opportunities for folks, and how do I serve folks, but that I want to do my best and I want to lead. And then I also would call it, transformational leadership. So it's about, not just getting up. And so I'm not the type of person that's going to come in and say, I'm the person that's in charge. Even when I introduce myself, sometimes I'll say I'm with the Human Rights Commission. Like, I don't say I'm the director or move in that vein. Because I think so often titles don't always denote where power lies or where impact lies. And I really, really feel that, it takes all of us on the team to have success. And I move in that spirit. But I am a taskmaster, and I am extremely direct. And I think, especially for women, sometimes that gets misread. I might be assertive and someone else may call it aggressive, or I'll be direct with limited emotion and people might call it mean. And so I think that those are the balances that I'm trying to navigate, because, I put tremendous pressure on myself to get it right, not for myself, but for other people. And there's a sense of urgency in getting that work done. And that pressure and urgency doesn't always, I tell people usually when my just had this conversation with someone going through the hiring process, and I'm like, I just want folks to know I am not Mary Poppins, right? Like, I'm not coming in with an umbrella and singing and dancing and saying how amazing today is. I'm going to come in, and sometimes I forget the small talk and I forget the icebreakers, because I just want to get down to business. And I'm learning as I get older that not everybody functions that way. And so trying to be a little bit more mindful of the different, going back to my days as a kindergarten teacher, for, who needs somebody to just kind of give them the extra time, trying to assess the room. I've done not a great job of like understanding that the staff and employees are also community. I've been really good about like respecting community at large, and need to do a little bit better job of sharing and having that same lens for community as staff.
Thank you. I completely understand that. And I think the work that you do is so important. I mean, it's really about people's ability to live in ways that they need to survive. It's about survival for a lot of people. How do you inspire the people that you work with to have the same passion that you do? I look at what you just said as passion and drive to make the changes that you talked about wanting to make. How do you help other people see your vision and carry out that work?
I mean, that is the place where I do try to just have honest conversations with people. I do think conversations are really important. And typically I try to align the work with someone's passion. Like, what is the thing that motivates you? Why are you here? So I would typically say to folks just that, like, what do you want? Like, what would mean? So there's a lot of freedom and flexibility in a lot of ways in the work, because I will say to folks, like, what do you want in this space? Like, what what impact do you want to have? What do you want to do? Or what does success look like? And then using that to thread into the actual work. You all met and had conversation with Dulce, and it really was like, for Dulce, she has such a love of community and she has that passion, but she also has like the creativity of being a filmmaker and all of these different things. Like, how do we bring all of that to bear, right? Like, do you want to moderate a panel? Should you have more conversations? For someone who likes to do research, should you be doing more research and writing memos? Like, really trying to think about what is the skill set that you have and how do you bring that to bear in a way that you bring that energy to the work. And so again, that's where I would go back to my ways as a teacher to just say, hey, let's just sit down and understand, like, what is it that you want to do? Can you do that in this space? And if not, what are our options? Like, what do I have to have done? Like, what is needed here? And finding the compromise.
What does it look like, or have you confronted a situation where you disagree with somebody's path to make a change, or you think that it is going to move the organization or the work that you're doing in the wrong direction, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the challenge for me of being like in a bureaucracy like the city that has these rules and how you move forward. So community always comes first for me in this work. That's the nature of the Human Rights Commission, and have definitely had moments when folks put their academic research over community's lived experience or perception of the work. And that to me is a challenge, because just because I read about it doesn't mean that I know best from a lived experience. And I think that's where I've had the most pushback, right? Where when people have come and said they wanted me to take a stand on something that maybe something that I read suggests that I should take that stand, but that when I go out in community, that's not what community wants. And so that conflict for me doesn't become about like what it is that I want, but it really becomes about like, if my role is to amplify community voice, sometimes that means I amplify things that I may or may not agree with. And so on a personal level, I can talk about what I agree with, but on the role of amplifying community voice, I'm not there to censor those voices. And so that's been a place where we've had, where I've had some challenges. I would say also just the idea of what success looks like. You know, I've said to people, we will have these conversations about like, you know, okay, we want to have a job fair, and you have a job fair and 300 people show up and everybody says it's a success. But if only 30 people get jobs, would we have been better off to have fewer people show up? Right? Like that means that 270 people did not get a job. So I think that those are the things that I also wrestle with in terms of, you know, people, we want to use these standard modes of these standard metrics to define what success looks like, where it might be how many people showed up to a meeting, or how many people signed the sign-in sheet, or how many people finished a course. But is that the real measure of success, right? Because if everybody finishes the course, but then nobody else goes back to ever review anything that you talked about, or doesn't learn anything, or if it didn't help anything other than that 6 weeks, then I don't know if that's the real success. And so I think that's where I've had a lot of like going back and forth, and that's typically where it gets really dicey for me. And then I do have to get into, you know, following the rules, the bureaucracy's way of like how you manage folks. Because for me, I always keep looking for can I just talk to you about like, you know, this is what you want. This is what the rule of this organization says, and this is what community wants. Can't we come to a happy medium? And sometimes, you know, that doesn't always play out well. You know, I recently was trying to have a conversation with someone, and it escalated in a way where I was like, wow, this isn't healthy. And, you know, is this a good fit? Or do I now use this to say, you know what, the values are not aligned here. The work ethic isn't aligned here. You know, what do I do in this moment? Usually works out. I mean, I've never really had to go all the way through that. Once I start to just document this is the way it is, then typically people, go and find another job.
How do you keep your energy for this type of work? I'm thinking about when you mention all the different places where you're trying to make sure that people have, the access to education and, you know, uh, understanding that they are supported whether or not they're documented, that people of different gender identities have rights, the Black and African American community is supported, and we're looking at hundreds of years of systemic and institutionalized discrimination and racism. And you're taking these practical steps toward addressing that. Do you ever feel overwhelmed, or like how do you keep the energy up for that work when you're up against such big and long-standing institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not as good at I'm good at preaching it, but not as good at practicing what I preach. So I really do try to say to people, it's important to take time. I have over, the pandemic, I think so many people learn new ways, new strategies of living. That's been really good for me over the last couple of years, is that I do try, whether it's prayer or meditation, I try to spend every morning where I just don't do anything, right? Where I just read something or take a moment. For a while, I was trying to be really good about taking walks 3 times a day. But it's really, really important to find balance, but it's really hard to do that. And for me, it's challenging because most of the work that I do is something that I would do even if this wasn't my job, right? Because I came to this space doing this work as a volunteer, right? So it was something that I was volunteering to do. And I think now what I've got to do is be really intentional about creating the space to create some distance, because it is very heavy and draining. I was just talking to someone about how the conversations or the engagement or even just doing the research and understanding the history of some of this is so very heavy. And sometimes that emotional toil can be even heavier than, carrying, 100-pound weight.
Thank you. Yeah, I truly can only imagine. I mean, I think that to take that on and then feel that responsibility to try to make change would be such a challenge. And I commend you for the work that you do to continue to wake up and push the bar and do the right thing and continue the work that you believe in. What is it like working in the public sector when your decisions and projects are so visible to San Franciscans, and what does that feel like to always kind of feel like you're being watched in every decision that you make?
It's been the last couple years, maybe 3-4 years, have been the hardest, I would say. And the challenge is to know who you are, because you can't buy into the narrative that's put out about who you are or your relationships or who you're connected to. So I think that's because it is hard, right? We all want to be liked, we all want to be seen, right? Regardless to what folks say, none of us wants to go into a room and be kind of looked at funny or talked about or treated differently. And so I would just say that is an everyday kind of struggle to just be able to, be okay with who you are and just remind yourself who you are. You need to remind yourself. You need to know who you are. And that's part of why, for me, when I go through some of these things, I'm like, this is the work that I want to do and why I want to do it. And to not get caught up into other people's narratives. Not to say that it doesn't happen, not to say that I don't sometimes, get hurt or kind of pushed aside by how somebody else defines me, but that ultimately yeah, that I start to kind of just go, wait, that's okay. I know why I'm doing this. I know, my intent, and I'm okay with that.
Thank you. Um, what when you were appointed as the executive director of the HRC, you mentioned you came to this work, you had been doing a lot of volunteer work, and you didn't necessarily plan on it. Would you say you felt prepared to take it on, or like what was it look like when you started in the role, and did you have space to bring your own projects and vision to the position?
Yeah, I mean, I was really fortunate in that I was on the actual commission. I wasn't staff, but I was one of the commissioners before I became the director. And the department had just gone through a major change. And so when I first came on, over 40 people had been transferred out. The department had been split, and there were only 8 people in the department when I came. And so when now we'll, at the end of this fiscal year, we'll be up to close to 40 people. So we will have grown back up, and all of that is the programming or projects and things that I've launched or started and supported in that time. So yeah, it's, I had some experience, but it really was bringing with me what I had learned from community, and really just over the years being responsive to community. Most of the projects were things that either the mayor or the board of supervisors or community had wanted started and had asked to be started in my department so I could partner with them.
Wow, 8 to 40 is impressive. That's you've built back a whole commission. It sounds like that's incredible. What would you say is one of the most challenging parts of your role?
Most challenging. I think the hardest part for me probably is balancing the work with the work, right? So the heart of the work, the pieces that I love the most, balancing that with the things that you have to do, which is like making sure that payroll is done, making sure that budgets are met, making sure like all these other kind of the administrative duties. I think that's the challenge for me, is that I'm really interested in the heart of the work, but being a leader, like you can't separate the administrative work from that. And so, if I forget to sign payroll, people don't get paid. If I forget to submit an invoice, people don't get paid, right? Like, so there are all these different pieces that that sometimes aren't as glamorous as the other. And I won't say glamorous, but that aren't the things that I enjoy the most.
You don't feel as much passion for the payroll as you do for the other parts of the job. Completely understand. What do you feel like is some of the most rewarding parts, or can you talk about some of the victories that you've had since you've taken on the executive director role, and things that are memorable that you've accomplished?
I would just say, when I think about it, it mainly is the feedback I get from folks, from feeling seen and feeling valued. So, I mentioned the American Indian Cultural District has been working with our office to launch the Truth and Reconciliation, and they recently just put a forward through the Board of Supervisors to establish this committee, and like the joy that brought them, right? Like that, it really wasn't that we did anything much more than make those connections for folks, but that was huge. The relaunch of the LGBT Advisory Committee, where folks felt again seen and valued and heard, and just the camaraderie and the excitement that people had being in space together, like that was huge for me. Like I love seeing that. Or it's over the last year or so, working with the library to identify books and then to put together these activity kits that then get distributed. and like sitting in a room with folks who run after school and summer programs and giving them, you know, a set of books for every kid, every young person that's in their program, and then going through the activities with them and them being like, this is amazing, and being excited to get these books is a really like big deal to me. So it's things like that where it's like we're investing in people, and people appreciate that and feel valued. Like that's a big deal to me.
I love that everything you mentioned was like a direct interaction with a person. You know, I thought maybe you would have some like big sweeping reform or something, and I'm sure that you have a lot of big projects that you work on, but what you talked about was what it means to that one person who receives it or who feels seen or heard by you, and how important that is. Thank you for sharing that. Um, what would you say that you do to continue growing and developing as a leader? How do you make sure that you're continuing to invest in yourself?
So, I mean, you know, I just finished last year, I finished the program at USC to get my doctorate. But, you know, what's been kind of a wonderful opportunity is that I keep getting these opportunities to talk to people about their books. So, you know, the only challenge is that sometimes when I get invited to do like an author talk, it's like a few days before the talk and the book is like 500 pages. And so then I'm trying to read like 500 pages in a couple of days, but that generally that has been really great. And then now I'm starting to do more around research. So I recently have been paying attention to, you know, calls for proposals or invitations to write research projects or to do, like I recently did, responded to a call for proposals for a chapter in a book about violence prevention. So those are things, because that requires the little extra research and study. And so that's kind of how I'm keeping myself pushed forward. I always laugh because I said that I didn't want to be an attorney, because being an attorney is like being in school for the rest of your life. You always have to study and do. And I'm like, but you know what? I ended up doing that anyway. Like I feel like I'm always researching, or, you know, oh my goodness, Google. Every time somebody says something I don't know, I'm like, what does that mean? You know, and then you go down, as many people do, the rabbit hole. But that I definitely am doing more research and trying to push myself to do a little bit more writing.
Thank you. Yeah, you're definitely in a field where you it sounds like you'll just always be learning for the rest of your life, even if it's not through a book, it's through talking and sharing community and spaces and hearing from the people that you're serving. So yeah, you you're definitely in a role where you got kind of what you didn't want with the continuous ongoing learning. Um, what sacrifices or compromises do you feel like your role makes you take on? Do you feel like there are challenges in that regard where you know, your values are ever compromised, or are you able to follow what you always feel like is the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate in that sense that you know, I've been able to say to folks like that, people know where the line is for me, right? Like, so it's been very clear. And I don't feel like I've had to compromise my values. I will say that, you know, when you do this type of work, sometimes you maybe don't pay as much attention to some of the personal things. So I'm sure, you know, that sometimes I look back and I'm like, did I miss one too many things with my son? Did I put somebody else ahead of my own family? Like those things are things that I kind of look back on. But for the most part, I feel like I've been pretty true to myself and my values and the things that are important to me.
That's great. I'm sure your son must be very proud of you and the work that you do. Um, what advice would you give to somebody who is going into a leadership position for the first time, or who is interested in a position in leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I would say pay attention, right, to what's around you. Listen to people. But I think the hardest thing to do that we all have to continuously work on is to know yourself, right? Know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know the things that challenge you, know what kind of triggers you, right, to act or behave in a certain way. You know, those were things, again, as a teacher working with little kids, but also having to engage with parents, like I had to learn that lesson fast, right? Because even more so in a school where people were paying, you know, really large amounts of money for their 5-year-olds to go to school, like the sense of entitlement maybe comes at a different level. And so really being mindful of your words and your language and very clear about what you're going to say and knowing, I mean, I remember pretty early on, I had an opportunity to work in another private school where I was going to work, you know, I was working 5 days a week. I had the opportunity to work 2.5 days a week and make more money than where I was working. But the rules that the school had didn't align with me, right? Like, so, you know, we weren't, you know, I'm mentioned, I'm like old school. I grew up in a very kind of conservative, like, you know, way of thinking and all of that. And I just remember them saying, like, you know, if the kids were standing on the table and jumping off the table, you couldn't tell them to stop. You had to just kind of go like, let's take a moment. Let's think about what would be. And I was like, oh my God, I would go crazy. Like I knew that that was not going to be what was best for me, right? Like I had to make a really hard decision because I wasn't going to be successful in that environment. But I knew that no matter how much I told myself and no matter how well I did on the interview, no matter that, didn't matter that they actually wanted me, that within a month, either I was going to be miserable or they were going to be, like, it was not going to work. And so I just learned pretty early on that I need to go where I can thrive and be my best and where people will appreciate my truest self, right? And so I needed to know who my truest self was, because otherwise and you know, fortunately I'd had all these jobs before I ended up teaching where I was like, oop, don't like that, nope, can't do that, right? And that I was young enough that it didn't matter that I was quitting my jobs, it seemed like every other month, but that I knew what I could and could not do. And I would just say that is the most important thing, is to understand who you are, what your limits are, what your boundaries are, and what you're willing to do.
Thank you so much. So we only have 2 minutes left, and I just want to ask if you had to sum it all up. I think that was a really powerful answer. Is there one characteristic that you think that all leaders should have?
Wow. I mean, I do think that there is something for being empathetic, right? I think that there is something for understanding or trying to understand what's going on with other folks. I think it'll take you a very long way, especially in leadership, right? Because we just always, if leadership is only about what I think, then I'm going to miss people most of the time. But if I can tap into what's important and value of other folks, my chances of getting to where I need to be are a little bit better.
Agreed. Thank you so much. So we are now going to move into our question and answer portion, and I'm going to turn it over to Isabella. Thank you so much for chatting today, and we're going to hear some questions from our audience.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Isabella He, and I am a nutrition program student at CCSF. Thank you, Director Coffey, for inviting Director Davis. And thank you, Director Davis, for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your stories and experiences with us. We have learned so much from you. I particularly loved hearing about your experiences at the French American International School. It made me reminisce about my time at a language immersion school that I went to when I was younger. And I also loved your advice about knowing yourself when it comes to leadership, because I think that's more healthier and sustainable, and you're focusing on self-growth. And I'll definitely be taking that to heart for myself. I see that There are several questions in the chat. If you have a question or comment, feel free to enter them in the chat. For the next 18 minutes, I will be facilitating this Q&A portion. So let's start with the first question in the chat. Director Davis, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, first question. I would like to know what the most takeaway was for Director Davis to teach in immersion school setting. Some difficulties in teaching in the international school, like the French American International School.
I would say for me, the hardest part was watching in the beginning when the students are expected to, like, I can just remember, little ones saying, I need to go to the bathroom, and them needing to say it in French before they could be released. And just how painful that was to kind of have them learn, because the teacher would just repeat it in French and they didn't understand to just say it in French. And so it would be this, this interesting cycle of little ones saying they need to go to the bathroom, being told to say it in French, but not understanding that they were being told to say it in French. So just the challenges of like learning. It just was a real example to me of like the challenges of learning. And then I would say for me as a teacher there was the reality that my academic language learning is not quite the same as immersion. So having had French in high school and in college, and then to be in a school where they were speaking it and going, I have 6 years of language and I have no idea what anybody is saying right now.
That sounds super frustrating for the little kids, not being able to go to the bathroom. But yeah, thank you so much for your wonderful answer. Next question. Are there times when the members of the HRC do not agree on a way to go forward with an issue? How is compromise or consensus developed for the best outcome?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say there are several times, especially when we talk about law enforcement or police reform. Specifically, we had some conversations in the past around tasers. And there was we did a lot of community meetings around that. And that was a very challenging time. And ultimately, we had to put together a report based on our community engagement process and make a recommendation to the police about what to do about tasers. And, by and large, the majority of community didn't want them, the folks who would come to the community meetings, and the majority of staff didn't want them. But when we looked at who was disproportionately impacted by tasers, that was a different population of folks. And going in and talking to those folks, specifically folks who had been tased, they had a different perspective. And it was like, when do we say majority rules is not equity? So there was this back and forth over how do we tell this story over the fact that the majority of folks that were being arrested or victims of police brutality were young Black men, but that they weren't the people that were actually participating in the conversations that we were having, and their voices were being erased from the conversation. And so that was kind of the battle that we were having, because I wanted to make sure, even if those voices didn't, kind of agree with what we were hearing from the larger community, that their voices deserve to be heard. And so that was some battle that we had. And, and ultimately, I think we got to the place where folks in the community as well as in the office understood the importance of elevating those responses. But it was hard for people, right? Like it was really hard to have to hear from folks who had direct lived experience with it, who maybe didn't support or agree with the data that we currently had. So that's one example of that. And then we've had some similar conversations around closed juvenile hall or juvenile justice reform. What is it that people want to see happen? And again, whose voices do we really listen to in that? Do we listen to the folks who've been researching juvenile detention centers for the last 30 years? Do we listen to people that have been in a juvenile detention center within the last 5 years, or that were in them 20 years ago? Or do we listen to the parents that are experiencing it now? So those are the kind of those are places where we've had some tension, both within community, but also within our office about like, how do we move this work forward? Because we almost have to, sometimes it looks like we make some voices more important than others.
Yeah, it seems very difficult to consider everybody's opinion because you want everybody's voice to be heard. And that's very commendable to try to balance all of that and implement it into actual work and seeing that go through. So thank you for your answer. Okay, next question. How do you approach the human rights challenges that our city and nation is currently facing?
That's a hard one, you know, and every day it is a challenge. We're limited in some ways by the city charter or the laws in what we can engage in. So we're limited to, we're not, unless the administration or the legislative branch gives us permission, we typically are not supposed to weigh in on state and national matters. And then it's interesting here, and some of this predates my role with the Human Rights Commission, but that we haven't seen as much when we talk about homelessness and mental health and so just more recently, or even justice reform, we haven't seen folks immediately try to come to the Human Rights Commission as a partner agency in some of that work. And so that's some of what we've been doing over the last excuse me, few years, is to actually connect and partner with those other city departments and agencies to talk about the role of human rights in that, right? So to talk about housing or homelessness with that human rights lens, to talk about education with that human rights lens, to talk about public safety. And I think that because so much of the work initially was focused on bias and discrimination, that folks have lost sight of the idea of the rights of people to live free or to live safe or to live, to have housing. So we're having to do some narrative shift around some of those things.
Thank you so much for the answer. Next question. What do you do to work, interact, and communicate effectively with diverse communities?
So for me, the key to that is to actually, you know, and this is one of the things that I've tried to stress to other departments and other partners, is that I don't wait till something happens to build those relationships, right? Authentic relationships are really important. And I can't show up in every space. So being an ally or being a partner and working with folks who have credibility or who are trusted messengers in those places. And so we've been really intentional over the last couple of years. We've been partnering with the API Council. We've been working with the Latino Task Force. We've been working with the Transgender Cultural District. We've been working with different neighborhood collaboratives and collections of folks. So being very intentional about who's leading that work or who's experiencing the impact of the work and centering them in the work. So for me, it's about building those relationships with diverse communities, building trust within those diverse communities, and then trusting those communities to lead the work. So a lot of times it's not about us leading the work as much as it is us saying what's needed and providing the support and resources to the folks who can actually do that. So we'll have grants that we put out where we will do a call for proposals where people can say, you know, this is what they want to do and this is how they would use the money, versus us trying to lead all of the work, because authentic, real, trusted relationships in diverse communities need to be established. And if they aren't established, then you need to partner with people that have those.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's very important to bring those voices into. Another question is asking, I would like to know how Director Davis handles disagreements. And I think you may have touched on this earlier before, but you can definitely go into more detail with this question.
Yeah, so disagreements for me, I'm very direct. So when we typically have had those, if it's very clear, clean, clear cut for me, then I usually am very direct with that and say, you know what, I don't agree. And this is how we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then I leave room for conversation. But that at some point in time, I remember one time I had a boss that, he and I were going back and forth over this thing that I wanted to do. And we were trying to negotiate and navigate. And then finally he came back to me and he said, look, we can go back and forth all day long. He said, but ultimately I'm the boss here and I'm making a decision and I'm going to tell you, this is what we're going to do. So I appreciate your thoughts, but this is it. And so I usually will say to folks, like, I'm not going to waste a lot of time with us going back and forth if there's no room for disagreement, but that I do provide space for folks to have their opinions. But if at the end of it, this is what the bureaucracy of the job says that this is the way that we have to do it, or if I come back and I say, look, we've gone into community and this is what community wants to do, then I say, I appreciate what you had to say and what you want to do, but this is the way that we're going to move it forward. Or I will say, like, well, can we compromise? Is there room for compromise? And if there's not, then I will I literally will say, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, this is the way that we have to go. And I think that's the hard part with being in leadership, is that you can't always compromise your way out of it. You can't always come to a happy ending or happy medium. And that sometimes we're both going to be upset with the way that things end up, but that I typically try to just be true to what's happening in the moment and what the choices and what the options are. And it is what it is. And folks have to accept that.
Sounds really difficult, yeah. Trying to either acknowledge and move on or find that kind of medium balance between each parties. So that was the last question for the Q&A. And I will be passing it on to Tayako for the final portion of our Leadership Fireside Chat. Thank you for your wonderful answers.
Thank you, Isabella. And thank you, Director Davis. Okay. Thank you, Isabella, for facilitating the Q&A portion of our event. And then thank you again, Director Davis, for answering some more questions from the audience. We really appreciate you sharing helpful tips, lessons learned, and sage advice. I personally loved hearing about your experiences, especially your, idea that very first time you shared your idea with us for, people of color to go to, to have opportunity to go to private schools. And you are teaching at the, bilingual immersion schools. And also the valuable activities in Human Rights Commission, and your guidance given to us, like, pay attention what's around you and know yourself about your strengths and weakness and what your limits are. It really spoke to me. Thank you very much. My name is Tayako Tateno, and I am an ESL student at CCSF. I am now going to facilitate the last portion of our time together, which is to invite you to share what inspired you today, or what you have learned from Director Davis. If you'd like to share, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom, and then let me call on you. Thank you. Anybody would like to share? Sophia? I'm a facilitator, but may I share?
Please go right. You know what? We also see that we
Facilitator,
Irma is
so
raising her hand. So Irma, if you want to open up our takeaway and sharing portion, please do. And Tayako, yes, you are more than welcome to share your takeaways as well.
okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much again, Director Davis, very, very much. Yeah, it, you know, about people of color to go to private school really resonated with me. And and I was surprised that you used to teach, you know, at French American International School, because my daughter went to Chinese American International School. Shared, you know, shared a part of the campus with French, you know, face students, and you know, so I really appreciate all the teachers. That to be honest, you know, when my daughter went to Case from K through 9th grade, because you know French American go to high school, up to high school, but Chinese American they don't. And I was, you know, during the time my daughter was at Case student, I used to be so intimidated and overwhelmed by parents. And, you know, most of them are, you know, like Harvard graduate, Stanford graduates. And then I always felt like I was an outsider, you know, I don't belong. I thought I didn't belong. But, you know, that's, you know, where my school, that's where my daughter studied, you know. So, yeah, but, you know, I just, it was it brought, my daughter is now college student, but it really brought me back to a memory. And I'm very, very thankful to have somebody like you in private schools like, you know, Case or, I mean, Face or Case. Thank you so very much. That's all. Anybody else? Sophia, your hand is up. Please.
Yeah, I would love to give a takeaway. But Irma, I don't want to. Why don't you go ahead and share your takeaway?
Oh, Irma, I'm sorry.
After.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. Yes, I really want to share what learning or giving the advice, Dr. Davis, especially because on the Family Resource Center, I'm working with a lot of immigrants, and I really appreciate how you explain how we're working in advocacy for the diversity people, especially when we are learning the second language. And I remember the same as me, I'm putting in the position, and I really like it. And thank you that you say how we be more empathy with them, that I can just started to living in this country. And also the advice that I get it as I'm the Department of Child Development, and also I have to be with the level with the children, teaching with the children, but also I like it that you also emphasize how be on the level of talking with the parents too, especially because I'm a very happy person and I like to bring that emotion with the children, and the parents, they are not on the same level of emotion. We don't know what exactly happened at home. And they are looking at me like a very strange, like, why are you so happy? What you try to tell me? Especially because they are the parents, they know the children better than our teacher. And I really like it that you say, like, really pay attention how we behave as a leader, because they gonna look at us, and also we wanna be an example for others. I really love it, what you say and how you mention. I mean, I put it like a very capital letters, because I don't really focus on myself, how I behave, because I think in everybody we are on the same environment, but you mentioned very careful, and also how we that imitate or be around there with the people, the trusted people. I love it, and thank you so much for emphasizing that part. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you, Emma, for sharing your thoughts and idea. So, Sophia, would you like to go next?
Yes, sure. Excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Davis, for joining us and for sharing not only your experience and how you got to where you're at today and the way your professional path looked, and also for sharing with us like what it's like not only on your professional or your personal path to this position, but the professional hurdles that you also, you know, face. I think one of the things that really strikes me is the amount of compromise you have to make in order for policy or programs to take place, to start root, to really get off the ground. And it's striking because I feel like for a lot of individuals who work in public service or whose personal value is service to others, it can feel like a personal blow when you can't get, you know, you can't get across, when you can't implement what you feel is a personal value. And I feel like that is, for me personally, it would be very hard. It would be very hard for me to go every day to a job where it was difficult for me to implement changes that I feel are necessary for an equitable standard of living a happy life, a life that is attainable for everyone. And I feel like just being in that environment where you would have to make compromises that may feel like you're making a compromise with your own personal value in order to have something started for a community, that would be difficult. And I commend you 100% for always fighting that good fight. So thank you very much. I also want to see if anybody else has any other takeaways.
Oh, yes, Candice, would you like to share?
Yeah, and first, thank you again for Director Sheryl Davis. Yeah, that's no doubt that we really learned a lot from you today. And especially when you mentioned that how to improve the outcome, and also how to keep energy, especially during this special time. I think that, yeah, I really learned the ways how to do that. And also, I would like to share that when you mentioned how to deal with the disagreement, you say that you can always come to a happy ending, right? I think that's one of my problems, because usually when we come with a conflict, you wanted to make everybody happy, and then maybe you need to spend a lot of time, or finally you can make an agreement. So I think that's an important part and the most difficult part as a leader. And you really inspire us and give us the instruction how to deal with such situation. So thank you. Thank you for your sharing.
Thank you, Candice, for your insight. I was exactly thinking like you did. Anybody else would like to share? We have about 2 minutes, about 3 minutes. Anybody would like to share? Hi, Amy, thank you.
Sorry, I know it's hard to see my hand, and I wanted to give all of the participants space to share, but I did just want to thank you for sharing your journey. I think what really struck me was the fact that you arrived at this just through a series of volunteer opportunities, and that you really collected a lot of knowledge and knowledge about yourself in the other positions that you held. You mentioned that you had kind of moved, you know, around to different jobs, and as somebody who is, you know, I don't love change in terms of like myself and like, you know, being brave enough to try new roles and kind of put myself out there. So my takeaway really is just to try to say yes to the next opportunity that comes up, or if you know, if I see a need, to not hold back or think like I'm not needed there. What can I really do? I can't really change anything. I don't have any experience. I don't know what I'm doing. I think that those are things that are kind of my internal monologue that it sounds like you were able to either turn off or don't have, and just say, okay, well, there's a need and I'm going to go see how I can help. And that turned into something that is now an amazing career and something that you're doing that is changing people's lives. And so when you started, you know, because you weren't imagining this for yourself, or you weren't like, okay, how can I become the executive director of the HRC, but that's where you landed, is to remind myself to just be open to opportunities and not be afraid to try them. And you don't know where it will lead, but keep an open mind and look for those opportunities, and especially in service to the community and in ways that help other people. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing. And I was just looking at the chat. Okay, chat. Director, thank you, Director Davis, for, you know, writing a very, very important thing in the chat. Yes. Okay, so, okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for sharing your takeaways and ideas. Okay, I would like to ask Director Davis if you have any final leadership advice that you would like to share here. Thank you.
Not really. I just, listening to Amy just made me just think, like, you know, that there's nothing too small, and that we all have something to give. And so just your leadership is bringing what you have. You know, I often quote Maya Angelou saying, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, right? So we all have been given something, or we all have something embedded in us to give, and sharing that can open the door, not just to new opportunities, but for new ways to see yourself. So take a chance on yourself every now and then, and you'll be surprised.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for the special guidance. I'm so impressed. Okay. We are at the end of our time together. Thank you to everyone who joined today's Leadership Fireside Chat. It was truly an insightful learning opportunity. And again, a very special thank you to Director Davis for joining us today as our last speaker in our very first year of hosting this event. We are truly inspired by you and your stories, and are honored to have you as our final guest of the series. If you are participating in the certificate part of the program, we look forward to seeing you on May 13th for our celebration event. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you again, Director Davis, for joining us today. I'd like to give a special thank you to our 4 student facilitators, to our Downtown Centers Associated Students Council, to our Student Activities Office, and thank you all very much for making this possible. Thank you so much, Director Davis, for spending your Friday afternoon with us, and I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend, and take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Director Davis.
Bye bye, everybody.
Bye,
Thank you so
everyone.